Ask a 9-year-old today to recite a phone number from memory. They can't, not even their own. Ask you, and you can probably still rattle off your childhood best friend's number, digit for digit. Knowing numbers cold wasn't a party trick, it was survival. If you missed the bus, got dropped off at the wrong house, or needed to reach a parent from a payphone, the only numbers that existed were the ones sitting in your head. Psychologists eventually gave this shift a name: digital amnesia. A widely cited 2015 study found most people now treat their devices as an extension of their own memory, rather than trusting their brain to hold the information. And some of the people tested couldn't recall a single phone number, including their own. That's the split millennials sit on. You can probably still picture your childhood best friend's landline number without trying. But ask you to recite your own mother's cell number, memorized in the smartphone era, and most people freeze, because nobody ever had to build that muscle twice. Schools have quietly adapted around it. Emergency contact forms now assume the number has to be written down, because reciting it from memory is no longer something you can count on. A roll of 24 exposures. No screen to check, no delete button. Just 24 guesses about whether the shot actually worked, and you wouldn't find out for days. Every photo you took through the 90s was a commitment. You framed it once, pressed the shutter, and moved on, because checking your work simply wasn't a feature the camera had. The company that eventually killed this experience was, ironically, the one that invented its replacement. Kodak engineers built the first digital camera back in 1975, then shelved it, worried it would cannibalize their film business. They protected the film industry for over 3 decades, until digital cameras and camera phones caught up anyway. Kodak filed for bankruptcy in January 2012. You grew up rationing shots because film and developing cost real money, which is why you probably still hesitate for half a second before taking a photo instead of firing off a burst of 20. A habit that didn't come from nowhere. It came from paying per exposure. Kodak emerged from bankruptcy the following year as a much smaller company, having sold off the very digital imaging patents that could have saved it. That screeching, warbling handshake sound. If you grew up in the 90s, your brain can still replay it on command. The sound of a modem finding another modem across a phone line. Getting online meant sharing a single household phone line with everyone else in the house. Pick up the phone while someone was connected, and you'd knock them offline mid-download, mid-conversation, mid-everything. AOL, the biggest name in dial-up, hit its peak in 2002 with roughly 27 million subscribers paying for that exact experience. What makes the story land differently now is the ending. AOL didn't quietly retire dial-up sometime in the 2000s. The company kept the service alive and running until September 2025, closing it out after decades in business. You probably still apologize on reflex before picking up a landline, even now. Years of, "Were you online? I'm so sorry," got baked into you in a way it never touched anyone born after broadband was just the default. One of AOL's old sign-up discs, the ones your family probably used as coasters or frisbees, is now preserved in the Smithsonian's permanent collection. A road atlas, cracked open across the passenger seat. Someone's finger tracing the highway while the driver asks, "So where do I turn?" Road trips required a navigator, a second person, whose entire job was reading the map out loud, refolding it at high speed, and occasionally admitting they had no idea where you actually were. Everyone assumes paper maps simply died the moment Google Maps launched in 2005. They didn't. Rand McNally reported rising road atlas sales starting around 2015, and in the UK, paper map sales jumped 144% in 2020 alone, followed by another 28% increase the year after. People buying the exact product GPS was supposed to have made extinct. You're still the one in the car who can hold an entire route in your head after glancing at a map once, while someone who only learned to navigate by blue dot has to check the phone at every turn. Spatial memory that got built by necessity, not by choice. The paper map didn't lose to GPS, it just stopped being the only option, and enough people missed it that it came back anyway. Finger hovering over the record button, waiting for the DJ to finally stop talking so the song could start. You built one by sitting next to the radio with a blank cassette loaded, timing the record button by ear, and accepting that the DJ's voice would probably clip the first few seconds anyway. There was no other way to build a personal soundtrack. The skill that took real practice was catching the song clean. Recording decks had no preview, so the only feedback you got was rewinding the tape and listening back, hoping you hadn't caught static or a commercial jingle. Car cassette decks quietly outlasted almost everyone's expectations. The 2010 Lexus SC430 is widely cited as the last new car sold in the US with a factory cassette player built in. Somewhere in your head, you still know exactly how many seconds of silence to leave between songs on a playlist, a habit inherited from timing tape, not code. Cassette sales have actually been climbing since the mid-2010s, with artists from Billie Eilish to Lady Gaga releasing music on tape again, the exact format you used to fill by hovering over a record button. You told your friends 3 p.m. at the mall entrance. There was no follow-up text, no OMW, no pin drop, just 3 p.m., and everyone showing up because that was the only version of the plan that existed. If you ran late, your only backup was a payphone and a quarter, or nothing at all. Plans made in person or over the landline the night before were locked in, because there was no infrastructure built for updating them in real time. Payphones peaked at roughly 2.6 million units across the US in 1995. By 2016, fewer than 100,000 remained, and in May 2022, New York City physically removed its last public payphone from a Manhattan street corner and placed it in a museum. Even now, a 5-minute delay can trigger a flash of guilt completely out of proportion to the situation, even though you could just send one text and be fine. The anxiety got wired in by a plan that had zero room for error. The tools changed, but the wiring didn't. That payphone now sits behind glass at the Museum of the City of New York, a piece of everyday millennial childhood formally reclassified as an artifact. 8 p.m., Thursday. Miss it, and you weren't finding out what happened until someone told you at school the next morning. Television ran on a schedule that didn't care about your plans at all. No pause, no rewind, no on-demand. If you weren't in front of the TV at the scheduled hour, that episode simply happened without you. The end of that arrangement has a specific date. On February 1st, 2013, Netflix released all 13 episodes of its first original series, House of Cards, at once, a show it had outbid HBO and AMC to land, paying roughly $100 million for the first 2 seasons sight unseen. The word binge-watching didn't really exist as a mainstream habit before that release. You still flinch a little at spoilers the morning after a big episode airs, even now. A decade of appointment television trained you to treat everyone watches it together as the default. Right before streaming quietly erased that shared deadline for everyone who came after you. By 2016, 3 years after House of Cards dropped, the number of people finishing an entire season within 24 hours of release had grown 20-fold. A gold-lettered spine, a specific volume, a report due tomorrow, and whatever that one book said was, for practical purposes, the final word. Research back then started at a shelf, not a search bar, physically locating a book that might contain your answer, checking its publication date, and accepting whatever it said as close to final, because cross-checking against 5 other sources wasn't realistic on a school night. Everyone assumes Wikipedia is what killed the encyclopedia set. The timeline says otherwise. Encyclopedia Britannica's print sales peaked all the way back in 1990 at 120,000 sets and had already crashed to 40,000 by 1996, 5 years before Wikipedia even launched in January 2001. Britannica didn't stop printing until 2012, by which point it was already finishing off a decline that started with CD-ROMs, not the open web. You're probably still the one in your friend group who checks a second source before believing something online, a reflex left over from a childhood where the encyclopedia said so wasn't automatically good enough for a passing grade. And it never fully turned off. The final 32-volume print set went on sale for $1,395, closing out 244 years of continuous publication. A 5x3 index card, typed by hand, filed by subject. The only way to find out whether the library even owned the book you needed before you'd walked anywhere near the shelf. Every library ran on the same system. A librarian or student filed a card for every book, cross-referenced by hand, and finding anything required knowing exactly how the catalog thought. Here's the detail that undercuts the nostalgia. The card catalog was never actually intuitive. It ran on a controlled vocabulary of official subject headings that had nothing to do with how an ordinary person would search, which is why Ask the Librarian was standard advice, not a last resort. The self-service reputation it has now is mostly retroactive. Ever wonder why you still browse a bookstore shelf by wandering instead of searching a title directly? That habit was built from years of hunting through drawers where browsing sometimes beat the correct method. Libraries spent the 1990s quietly replacing those drawers with computer terminals, and most kids never noticed the system underneath had changed completely. An envelope, sealed and stamped, dropped in a mailbox, and then nothing. Sometimes over a week of nothing before any kind of reply. Staying in touch with anyone outside your area code ran entirely on paper and patience. Camp friends, pen pals, relatives overseas. The letter was the only channel that existed, and it moved at the speed of the postal system, not the speed of you. First-class mail volume in the U.S. peaked in 2001 at over 103 billion pieces a year, the highest point it would ever reach, and has fallen more than 50% since, as email and texting took over the exact job letters used to do. That's why the sound of a mailbox lid, or the sight of actual handwriting on an envelope, still makes you pay attention in a way a notification never quite manages. Years of waiting on letters trained you to treat physical mail as automatically more significant than anything that arrives instantly. Most of what lands in a mailbox now is bills and advertising, which is exactly why an actual letter, on actual paper, reads less like nostalgia and more like an event. If this took you back, subscribe. More of your childhood is coming.